Hello, welcome back. My name is Shimona, and today I'm here to bring you an updated opinion build guide for rogues if you were interested in playing or trying Flurry. Um, yeah, so if you watched my last build guide, that was pretty early on. I had just made that build, and think I was like level, I don't know what level I was, but I was a lower level than I am now. And I did that build right after Twisting Blades got nerfed originally, I think like a week ago, and I was like, well, this build isn't as fun because I mean it was fun because you were playing Twisting Blades and it was about you dashing around and resetting all your cooldowns, and then that got nerfed, and I was like, well, Twisting Blades without all that nonsense is not very fun to play. So I was like, let me try and come up with something with Flurry. And I made that build and it was good, but since hitting level 100 and kind of optimizing it more, playing it around, switching up my Paragon skill tree, I wanted to make an updated video to that. So, first things first, I just wanted to put this as a disclaimer for anybody who is in the process of leveling up or trying to figure out something they enjoy. Um, don't don't do that. Don't get to level 100 first and then do that. Um, yeah, it's not a good idea. Um, And I'll show you why here really quick. If I want to respec one skill tree point is 75,000 gold. So I think I have about 55 or 60 skill points. So it's about 4 million gold for me to respec my whole skill tree. If I go to my Paragon points here, to respec one Paragon point is 40,000 gold. So if I want to respec my whole Paragon point tree up to this node, because this usually always just stays the same, it's about 200 skill points, so it's about 8 mil. So do a full Paragon skill tree rework is almost 15 mil, and that's not including, having to change gear, upgrade gear, change aspects, uh, all that kind of stuff. So, yeah, if you're not enjoying what you're playing now, and you think getting to level 100 and then switching is a good idea, I will tell you now it's not, because there is nothing that changes from the way you play your build now and the way you'll play it at level 100. There's nothing on the Paragon Tree. There are some minor quality of life increases, but in slight damage increases, but there is nothing that is going to change the way your build plays after pretty much level 50. I want to say level 70 because there are some aspects you can only get in World Tier 4, but yeah. uh, if you're here now and you're level 70 and or 80 or whatever, and you're like, I don't like what I'm playing, I want to play something that's better or more fun, congratulations, you are doing the right thing. Don't feel bad about switching around. It might seem expensive to you right now based off of how much money you have and everything and how much everything costs, but believe me, it is nothing compared to when you get to level 100 or even like 90. I mean, the amount of gold I can make is probably not even 10 to 20% more than you can make at level 70. So, but my respec costs are probably, if not double, triple, maybe even quadruple level 70's respec cost. Let alone the less amount of Paragon points. So, yes, figure out something you want at level 70. If there's nothing fun to play at level 70, there's no reason to go to level 100 because, again, nothing's going to change. Uh, and there's also not really much to do at level 100. There is an in-game boss, and you can push nightmare dungeons, which I don't think give any more reward than the lower level ones. So, yeah, find something you enjoy and then play that to 100 if you want. Otherwise, just play it to 70 and just fuck around at 70 and get 5 classes up to 70 and just figure out what you want to play on the new league. Maybe go play hardcore. Since there's not really any content in this game, hardcore might be a good option. But yeah, sorry for that long disclaimer. I wanted to make a whole video about it, but I've seen there's so many videos about that already. I don't need to do that because I feel like it's pretty common knowledge to most people who hit 100. First things first, we are playing combo points. I know a lot of Twisting Blades builds play Inner Sight, but I think combo points are really good, maximizing the amount of damage your flurry does. Something to mention about flurry is I tested this on the single target boss. So the way my build is, I can actually play Twisting Blades and flurry. All it costs me is just the 7 points to respec, which is about 500,000 gold to respec just 7 points at level 100. So if I want to do high tier dungeons, or if I want to do the end game boss, I can switch over to Twisting Blades really easily, and it only requires me to swap out one of my aspects. So it is quite nice in that regard. Um, and it's worth mentioning, Twisting Blades probably does a little bit over 3 times the damage Flurry does. But however, you won't notice that damage difference unless you are running nightmare dungeons that are much higher level than you, or if you are playing with a group of people. So I noticed when I was playing solo, duo, trio, Flurry felt, okay. When we got up to 3 people, it was clear it was quite lacking. When you get to 4 people, it doesn't feel as good, but it's still playable. You're still going to have all the survivability just based off of the gear we have and everything. So I think you only really have to play Twisting Blades is if you're doing the end game boss, or if you are pushing like tier 80 nightmares or above. And even then, I don't think you want to play either Twisting Blades or Flurry in those kind of dungeons. I'm pretty sure you're going to want to play some kind of ranged character, just because, Twisting Blades and Blade Flurry, you're just getting into melee range and you're just going to get slapped around. So unless you're playing like with the duo with the range guy and you can get in there and just do a bunch of damage and it doesn't matter you die because your friend can just revive you, um, I don't think it's very good late game. So I think Flurry is perfectly fine if you're leveling up. You're not going to notice a difference unless you're playing like in a 4-man. And even then, if you've got the right gear and you've got the right stats and you followed the build and you're, playing it right, I think you'll be fine. So let's go over the build. We're using Puncture with the Vulnerable mod. This is going to be not your only way, but your primary way of keeping Vulnerable up on a long-term target. We'll talk more about that later. We are obviously playing Flurry. We have 12% close DR. We have crits heal you for 3% of your life. We have critical strikes increase your movement speed. If you want to put points into something else, this is probably the first place to get it out of. We are using Shadow Step with the reduced cooldown reduction mod on it. This is a nice movement ability to dodge things, but more importantly, it makes you unstoppable. So if you get hard CC'd, you can use Shadow Step and it will break you out of CC. So this is a very important ability to have. The only way you'll really ever die on this character is if you get hard CC and you can't heal, but we'll talk a little bit more about that later. We're using Weapon Mastery. We are using Agile for dodge chance. We are using Exploit and Malice for just more increased damage. I am running 2 imbuements on this build. We are using Shadow Imbue and Poison Imbue. We're using the Shadow Imbue that increases non-physical damage that enemies take, and we're using the Poison Imbue that crit strikes. You could certainly consider removing these 4 mods if you were just running dungeons, because the imbuements are primary reason is to just empower your flurry and just make your flurry do more damage and have a higher chance to crit with the precision imbuement. But that's something I'll leave you to decide on yourself. So these are 4 points you could possibly put into something else if you wanted to. I thought my game crashed. We are using the debilitating toxins for 15% less damage from poisoned enemies. We are running Shadow Clone. We'll talk more about that in a second. We're using Lucky Hit up to a 30% chance to gain 8 energy. I think if you're doing a lot of AoE mob grinding, you could really consider dropping 1, 2, 3, 4. You could put 3 points into Second Wind and you could put a another point into adrenaline rush. Just increase your energy regen because you're going to be running around spamming a lot, and especially if you're early on where you don't have some of the energy regen stuff that I have later in the build, it could be a nice quality of life. Um, yeah, so I use momentum. It's quality of life. I think it's the better one. You basically just get more movement speed, you get more DR, you get increased energy regeneration. I would say if your energy regeneration feels fine and you feel like you'll survive without that 20% DR, you could probably run Victimize instead. Just increases your AoE damage. You could also use close quarters combat if you're missing some of the attack speed mods and you feel like you're not attacking as fast as you should be or could be. Um, that is a flexible one. Same with this. Shadow Clone is a nice DPS cooldown, and we do use one of these Shadow Clone ultimates in, or the ultimate ability node in the tree, but it is technically a flex spot, and if you are running dungeons by yourself, it's certainly not needed. Some things that you could run instead is you could run Dark Shroud for the damage reduction. You could run Dash for just more mobility, clearing faster. Um, you could run stuff like Poison Trap, potentially. Um, stuff like that. So it is a flex spot. I like Shadow Clone because you get a really big pack of mobs. You can just pop this. You can pop this on bosses and stuff. And it gives you unstoppable too. So it's another thing to break you out of CC. So that's the skill tree. I will have all this information in a Diablo planner. I'll put it down in the description so you can check that out. I'll have some notes on there about alternates on some things. And if you have any questions, you can just let me know. But please go check that out first before you ask anything, because anything that is asked, I will try and update in that link in the notes section. So I'll try and make it as comprehensive as I can within reason. As for the Paragon Tree, I just asked that you go look at the thing. It's pretty straightforward. I tried to make these first two trees ones that I would always use. So exploit weakness and no witnesses. Exploit weakness is just vulnerability related things. No witnesses, ultimate damage stuff. Like I said, if you decide not to use Shadow Clone, you could easily just respec out of all these points and just put them somewhere else in the tree. I think there's some other like close nodes. You could grab some more armor. I think there's, yeah, you could grab this crit strike damage here. I mean, there's just some other stuff you can touch too. This one right here is a really nice one to have too. I don't know why I don't have that one spec'd in. Oh, well, I actually spec'd it out because I was doing something else, but this is a good node. So you could just look to put those points elsewhere until you need it again. But yeah, we use the closer glyph. I'm not going to go over what all the glyphs do. If you're playing rogue, you're going to get these glyphs, and it's just when you get them, you can put them in there, and it's very specific where each glyph is. It's because that's where I could kind of fit everything and make sure I unlock all the requirements as needed. But this first spot here, we use the closer glyph. We come into the exploit weakness tree, and we put in a diminished glyph. Next thing, we come into the no witness tree and we put the exploit glyph. We come into the cunning stratagem tree, we put the combat glyph, and lastly we come to the tricks of the trade board and we put the chip glyph. So chip is another one that I think is flexible. This one is more useful for when you're fighting long or big healthy mobs and you are fighting them like for a while. If you were just clearing normal dungeons and stuff, you could probably use something like Infusion instead. Once you get Infusion to level 15, you can get the plus 25 intelligence on it, and it just reduces the cooldowns on your imbuments, which is nice. So this is probably the one I would use here instead of Chip for when I'm just doing normal dungeons. And maybe I'll make like two different builds. Like, well, I'm not really too worried about making a bossing build because I don't think it's really necessary. But yeah, just check the planner. If you have questions, let me know. I'll be happy to help. Gear. First things first, let's talk about gems. We have critical strike damage to vulnerable enemies on weapons. We have flat armor on jewelry, and we have, I'm using max life right now for what I'm doing, but you would want to have royal topazes on your gear because that's 50% damage reduction while control impaired. So the only way you really ever die on this character and build is if you get hard CC'd and you can't pop a health potion. So taking 50% reduced DR on top of all the other damage reduction you have just means if you get a hard CC and you can't break out of it, you will most likely be fine. I guess first things first, let's talk about uniques for this build. So there are a couple of options on uniques that we can possibly use. First things first is I like Grasp of Shadows kind of no matter what. It's a great unique because all of its stats are useful. It does only give you +3 ranks in your core skill, whereas getting a normal pair of gloves can go up to +4 ranks. But the unique ability is quite unique. It's very good for AoE, and it has 4 really good stats on it, which most uniques usually don't. So you get attack speed, you get vulnerable damage, you get shadow clone damage, which pairs really well with your shadow clone. If you're not using shadow clone, I would consider probably swapping these out for a nice rare pair of gloves. I've got some right here. You can see I've got crit strike chance, attack speed, and plus all stats with 4 ranks of flurry. I would probably ideally have Dex on these gloves instead, or some other kind of damage mod. But I think for most cases, if you're using Shadow Clone, you should just use these gloves. There are 2 weapons that you could potentially use. Ashira's Kanjar, which just gives flat attack speed, and Condemnation, which increases your core skills. I think that they're both decent options, but both of them require quite a high item power to be useful. Even at 805, I feel like this is just not good enough compared to the weapons I have now. Like I have an 818 sword and I have an 838 sword that is from a unique monster that doesn't really have good rolls, but this dagger doesn't have good rolls either. And it just up to 30% attack speed. The unique ability isn't any better than this critical strikes with your core skills increase your attack speed by 25%. So if for some reason you don't have some of these attack speed implicits and you get this dagger, you could use it, but I don't think this dagger is as useful as Condemnation. Condemnation I think is very good, but again it does require to have an high item power because your damage is based off of your weapons damage. It does have some good rolls on abilities, and it has a really good roll. The only reason I'm not using this one is if it had a higher percentage on the aspect portion of it, I would probably use it at this item power, but since it's a low roll and it's a relatively low item power, but if I got an item power 800 Condemnation with like at least like a 30% passive, I would definitely use this. And I think if you're using Condemnation, you should probably use Mother's Embrace as well. If you're having problems with resource generation, then you should definitely just use Mother's Embrace. But currently, with everything I have, my resource regeneration seems to be fine. Mother's Embrace is nice because I think it's the only required unique on the build, and you should get it from completing the campaign on a rogue. I don't know if all classes get this. I'm assuming not, but maybe it does. If all classes get this, make sure you save it and you can give it to your alt. But if not, yeah, you might have some problems, but again, not a huge deal. There's some aspects you can get that increase your resource generation when you kill a vulnerable enemy. You could figure something out. This is a nice quality of life, and again, it pairs really well with Condemnation. So, as for our other gear, let's talk about aspects. So basic skills grant 20% DR on helmet is pretty much required. Percent increased armor on your chest piece is pretty much required. I think if you're pushing really high level dungeons, you could consider putting this aspect onto your necklace, just because of how strong it is. But for general use, I think chest piece is fine. Legs, I am using this one, which I use for my bossing and stuff. But if you're not bossing, there is another one that gives you a barrier when you hit an elite enemy. I think that one is really good. And there's actually another aspect. I will have it in the build planner, but I just have not seen it drop yet. But it's something that I forgot. When you trigger a lucky hit, you get increased DR. something like that. Uh, I have not seen it yet. I don't know if it actually exists, but that one would be really good as well. We are using the shadow step uh, aspect on the boots, which is really good. Just gives you an additional charge. Again, shadow step is your main movement, as well as your only way to break out a hard CC. While we're talking about this, I want to just mention it's really important that we have rank 1 on everything, because any ranks higher are kind of wasted on all these, shadow step, on shadow imbuement, on poison imbuement, because all it does is increase damage of the imbuement or the skill itself, whereas this build is focused around making really strong flurries. So the only reason we imbue our flurry is because we get 9% increased crit strike chance when we have an imbued flurry, and so it's just making really strong flurries and sending those out. Some of these imbuements have some, value to them outside of that, but for the most part, all these like getting plus rank on helmet, plus rank on boots, plus rank on legs, it's just not needed. The only thing you care about empowering is your flurry. On our 200 weapon, I usually just run my my main class skill. I think it's the best. I do like the increased damage based on your primary resources. I think once you have enough of everything, you'll be at full resources for most of the time. But I'm not sure. I think you should just run your main skill on your crossbows, whether that's flurry or twisting blades, and then you should probably run your armor percent stacking on your necklace. The problem is if you run your armor percent on your necklace, you can't put a lot of stuff on your chest piece. So that's why I keep it on my chest. And so on my necklace, I just put increased damage with their primary resource. On my one ring, I use basic skills gain 30% attack speed. On my one sword, I use crit strikes with core increase attack speed, and then basic skills increase damage of your next score by 10% up to 30%. This is a very important one to have as well. And then you kind of have a flex slot with this ring. I use imbuement skill effects have increased effect against vulnerable. This is mainly for bossing, but you'll most likely be using Mother's Embrace most of the time. So it's not, but there's some other ones you can kind of flex out. You can kind of play around with what you want. Let me grab a drink here. Okay. Lastly, let's talk about rolls, skill rolls on gear. Crossbow is probably the biggest one. This is going to be your biggest damage stat stick. I think I actually have a really good one somewhere. This one right here. So this one right here, I think is probably going to be your best in slot. Again, you're going to get flat dex, you're going to get damage to close, core skill damage, and vulnerable damage. If you get 4 high rolls there, that is going to be your best crossbow by far. I've seen that you can possibly get some other crit strike damage, so possibly you could reroll dex for some kind of crit strike damage, either on imbued or just flat crit strike damage, and that would probably be a little bit better, but this is probably about as good as it's going to get. Same with your swords. Your swords are going to want to look pretty much like these. Mine aren't very good. This one is actually from a unique monster. That's why it's 838 item power, but you can see the rolls on it aren't that good. I did roll vuln damage on it, so I think it's fine as it is. This one is also just not good, but again, it's 818 and it's got 2 good stats, so I'm happy with it. Rings, I think it's really important that you get any kind of defensive stats where you can get them. The only kind of defensive stat you can get on a ring is flat life, so I think having flat life on your ring is very important. Other than that, you're going to be looking to get stuff like crit strike damage, crit strike chance, vulnerable damage, and damage to close enemies. You could also get stuff like crit strike damage, and some other things, but I think a ring like this would probably be your best in slot ring. Amulet has a lot of different roles you can get on it. I think the 2 most important are movement speed and cooldown reduction. By far, I think those are just the best ones you can get. If you're pushing higher tier dungeons, movement speed may not be as valuable for you on your amulet, but if you're just normal clearing dungeons, then it definitely is. Other than that, you can look to get some stuff like damage reduction from close enemies. You can get flat percent damage. There is also another role that is like cooldown reduction for your imbuments, which is good. And I think if you're stacking a ton of dex, percent dex could also be really good. Because if I had dex on both of my weapons, and I think most of my gear has dex on it already, I could be somewhere in the range of about 1200 dex. And if I got like a 10% dex roll, that's just 120 dex. So I don't know how much value that is, but I think it's worth considering. Other than that, I think like this one right here has imbuement skill cooldown reduction. That one would be very good. Cutthroat skill damage or just flat percent damage is pretty good. Uh, Other than that, there's one that's kind of a bait. This ranks of imbuement skills, ranks of exploit passive, I don't think are as good as it sounds. Um, so don't get baited by it. Definitely just a flat damage roll is better than ranks in certain things. And your percent armor is also a very good one to consider if you're going to be running high level dungeons and stuff. Having just more armor is ideal. Um, on your gear, again, you're just focusing defensive. So on your helmet, chest, legs, you're going to be looking to get flat life. On your helmet, you're going to be looking to get cooldown reduction, flat life, and percent armor, your three primaries. And your last slot is kind of flex. I think dex is probably the best you can get there. But I don't think ranks to your imbuments matter much on your helmets, at least not for leveling, maybe at the end game, but just get some flat dex, get some dodge, get some increased skill damage off those. Chest piece, same thing. Life and total armor are the best. I have 2 damage mods on here. Not by choice, I just couldn't roll anything better, but just get some form of damage reduction, something on it. My legs, pretty good. Life, percent armor, percent damage reduction, and percent dodge chance. I don't really like dodge too much. I think having some mix of rolls and everything's nice. You could also look to get damage reduction from distant enemies. And on our boots, the same thing. The only thing that really matters on these is having just percent movement speed. I think having one roll of damage reduction while injured is important, and I think your boots might be the best place to get them. You can also get some flat decks and some more dodge chance and damage reduction. So, again, the idea is just focus as much damage reduction and tankiness as possible where you can, because there's not many places to get it anywhere else in Paragon or anywhere. So. Make sure you focus those. Plus, if you're playing Twisting Blades, you're going to do plenty of damage regardless. So, I think that's pretty much it. I hope this helps somebody. I know I kind of ranted for a while at the beginning, but it's just kind of frustrating to get the max level and then try and play around with stuff, and it's just impossible. I mean, to think just a few days ago, I had like 160 mil because I got a really good crossbow I sold. It was like near perfect. And I sold it for 150 mil, which is crazy. But yeah. Yeah, I hope this helps somebody. I hope you enjoy playing Flurry. It's worth noting something that Flurry plays really well in controller, whereas Twisting Blades does not. When you are playing on controller and you use your core skill, whether that's Flurry or Twisting Blades, it'll use it in spot where you're standing. So if you use a Twisting Blades and there's nobody in range, it will use your energy, it will use your combo points, but it won't actually use your ability. So you just waste everything. Whereas if you're on mouse and keyboard and you right click something, it'll use it guaranteed. So if you are a controller player, Twisting Blades can be rather annoying to play. You have to make sure you actually run right up onto the target you want to hit, and there's always a chance that you're targeting targets like a random mob around them, and you're just not close enough, and it doesn't matter. So if you're playing controller, Flurry is amazing on controller. I think it's fine on mouse and keyboard. It's a little wonky to use, but I think the important thing on mouse and keyboard is you actually come here to options, and I haven't set it up yet just because they didn't have this last time I checked, and I was like, this is so stupid. You want to uncombine your interact and basic skill. So wait, no, Where's the movement? Oh, that's controller. You want to unbind your combine, move, interact, and basic skill slot. And you want to have your left click move only. And you should probably put your basic skill on right click, and then all your core skills and stuff should just be on your keyboard. So that's very important to do. Mouse and keyboard, I don't, or not mouse and keyboard, but controller, I would probably leave interact and basic skill on the same button. Just make sure you're careful not to be next to any of those interactables while you're fighting things, because your guy will just focus on interacting over it. But I think it's okay. You can, that's not a big deal. Not as big a deal as mouse and keyboard. So, yeah, I hope this helps somebody. I don't know if I mentioned it earlier, but Flurry is about, or Twisting Blades is about 3 times more damage than Flurry. But again, you won't notice that unless you're running with a group of 4 or you're pushing really higher level content than you are. So don't worry about it. Flurry is absolute. I leveled with Flurry all the way to 100. I had no problems. I did a bunch of 4-man groups while playing Flurry. It was a little slower than maybe some other builds, but I was able to hold my own against them. You know, so you're never gonna die with all this damage reduction and everything, so don't worry about it too much. And just play what you enjoy. That's all that matters, right? No reason to suffer all the way to 100, because it's not gonna get any better, man. All right. All right, let me know if you have any questions. Again, check the description, check out the build planner. Please check the notes in there if you have any questions. I'll try and put anything in there that I think is important and anything that gets asked here. But if you have any questions, just feel free to ask. I'll be happy to help. Enjoy.